as promised, my 1993 Dodge Dakota LE 4x4. As you can see, it's had an interesting life. Been through a few bumps and scrapes, and hasn't exactly been taken care of the best. Of course, that really doesn't mean much to us shade tree mechanics. Now, this thing has got more than a few things wrong with it. Judging by the amount of fluid in the brake reservoir, I'm guessing that it's probably got about half the brakes left. The clutch is probably the same. The engine, well, a compression test shows that it's got at least one bad head gasket. The other one seems to be in good shape, but you never know. As of right now, the first repair that's going to be going on will be the head gasket. This is going to be a two-parter, since I have to wait for the gaskets to arrive in the mail, which hopefully they should be here by tomorrow. But I figured I'd show you guys the teardown, at least parts of it, so that you have an idea of what needs to happen to replace a head gasket in a 3.9 liter V6 Dodge engine. And for our first look at the engine, doesn't appear to be much, doesn't look like there's much that could go wrong. But that's where it gets you. That's where it's deceitful. As you can see, somebody has already modified the upper radiator hose. This used to be one solid piece, but somebody cut it and spliced right there. I'm guessing because the thermostat housing, which is right down through there, is wet. And it gets wet every time this thing gets really warm. And that's because the cooling system is getting pressure bled into it from the cylinders because of the bad head gasket. It's also burning the radiator fluid, or at least forcing it out in such a manner that it's depleting it incredibly quickly. Obviously, the first steps will be to disconnect the battery, take off the air cleaner, disconnect all the linkage to the throttle body as well as the vacuum lines, and remove the fuel rail. So let's get to it. And the teardown has started. After disconnecting the breather hose and removing the air cleaner as well as its intake tube, you can start to see the beast. This is a 2-barrel throttle body, and the engine has multi-port injection instead of throttle body injection like similar Chevys. Now this part of the video is as much for my reference as it is for yours, as I need to be able to remember where all the vacuum lines, linkages, and bracketry is, so that when I go to reassemble the truck, I will know where everything goes, hopefully. I don't foresee any problems, but things always seem to leap out and surprise you when you're working on older vehicles. So it's never a bad idea to get at least some lay of the land before you start getting too greasy and end up in a world of trouble. Another tip for you guys, whenever you take off the serpentine belt and you have a repair to do, it's always a good idea to start checking your accessories. Give them all a good spin and a good wiggle. Check for any end play, anything like that. Now this idler pulley is a bit notchy. Doesn't have a lot of end play, but it does make noise when it spins, which means that the bearings inside it are starting to wear out. This idler pulley is not as bad, but it has a lot more end play. Let's see if I can stabilize the camera. There you can see it. The alternator doesn't make any noise. The air conditioning compressor makes a little bit of noise, but not too bad. Doesn't have much end play. You're not really going to get a good spin on the power steering pump when there's fluid in the system, and you're not going to want to spin it much when there isn't. It has a little bit more end play, but I'm not too concerned about it, considering the condition of the rest of the vehicle. And the most common thing to look for on older vehicles like this is this pulley here, the water pump pulley and fan belt pulley. you want to check the fan for any end play, which this does not have, and then give it a good spin and listen for noises. That will tell you the condition of the water pump, and let you know if it's in desperate need of repair or not. This one doesn't seem to be making any noise. Now, that doesn't always mean that the impeller inside the housing that's connected to this shaft is any good, but it's generally a good indication of the condition of the pump. Now, I'm going to assume that this one is in good shape because, well, I don't have any reason not to. But the final thing is to check the conditions of your belts. This one is in relatively good shape. I think it's been replaced recently. But go over the whole thing looking for any unusual wear, any chunks missing, anything that'll tell you that the belt isn't riding like it should or that it's old. And that will also help to tell you the condition of your vehicle. Another update. Couldn't get the fan off, so I just ended up taking the accessories off and the water pump off with the fan as one piece. But this is one of the reasons why I hate using silicone on any gaskets, especially like the water pump, because you can get silicone to squeeze into the gaps like this did. It was sitting in here like this. I mean, if they fired the truck up before this had fully cured, who knows how much silicone got sucked into the engine, what kind of damage it could have done, that sort of thing. I just despise it when people use silicone to this extent. Another thing is I picked up a new water inlet, or outlet I believe is what this is. You can see this is pretty heavily siliconed as well. The new style isn't this stamped steel flange like this. It's all one cast piece with a nice thick flange that gives you much better clamping force, so you don't need silicone in that particular seal. I'm probably going to regret it, but I'm not changing this temperature sensor just yet because, well, they told me the temperature gauge worked. Now, I didn't see that myself, and I'm assuming that that sensor is just an intake air temperature sensor, but I guess we'll find out soon enough. But yeah, even took the radiator out, so yeah, give myself room to work. Next thing will be to pull the intake off with the throttle body attached to it so that I can get to the wiring harness at the back of the engine and onto the transmission so that I can disconnect this mess and get it out of my way while I work on the heads. This is another reason you want to take it easy on the silicone. That is my thermostat housing. Or thermostat, excuse me. That's the housing. When I pulled it off, the thermostat came with it. There's virtually no silicone at all on the block because it's all over this. It can make it very difficult for it to flow through the hole. Because if that's acting as a heatsink or blocking the flow in any way, that can compromise your cooling system as well. So yeah, take it easy with the silicone, guys. Well, this is lovely. I've got one thing stopping me from taking the entire intake manifold off. I got the fuel rail off, took the alternator off so I could move the wiring harness better, but that exhaust crossover pipe for the EGR, the bolt you see there isn't 3/8, isn't a 10, and I can't find any of my 5/16, but I don't think it's any of those either, because the other one was 3/8, or 10. But yeah, and I can't get any wrenches on that because the sensor that you can see just barely behind it, that black thing there, that's a sensor. Well, the sockets that I have that'll fit on it are too shallow, and these are deep well sockets, so I'm not really sure what's going on, and I have no wrenches to fit that. That won't snap that thing off when I turn them. So I'm in a bit of a conundrum, but that's where I am so far. Success. Didn't find a 5/16, but I borrowed a 9mm, hammered the damn thing on there because it was only about a fraction of a centimeter, or a fraction of a millimeter too big. And it worked. Got the pipe off, got the intake off, sitting over there. But I also took the exhaust studs out. They were all easy to break loose, if not loose already, and one was missing on the passenger side. That, combined with the silicone that is on these intake gaskets, makes me believe that somebody's had their front feet in this engine fairly recently. The water pump had a surprise for me too. When I first started working on it, as you can see, it's got a bunch of silicone on it, but it's still good. And you can see the silicone buildup in these channels. Imagine how much that reduces the actual flow. This hole right here is where a unthreaded tube goes in to let water back in from the heater core. It's not pressurized, but it's a very common leak. Somebody had taken the tube out, flipped it over instead of just replacing the gasket on the tube, the little O-ring gasket, which you can buy at any hardware store or any parts store, and they stuck it in backwards, silicone the crap out of it. So yeah, that was pretty messed up. Don't know what I did with it. Oh, there's a tube. Wanted to throw it. That's the end that the hose. That's the end that's supposed to go into there, that they were using as the out, or the rubber hose went on that side. This is the end that the rubber hose is supposed to go into. This is the one they shoved in there and silicone the hell out of it. That's what it looks like when you screw up that badly. And the radiator seems to have been out of an automatic, and somebody just decided to screw it and swapped it over. Yeah, these are actual bullet casings that they stuck in the hose to clamp them off. You can see that there's threaded fittings, so it's not going to be hard for me to go down to the local hardware store and just pick up some regular plugs like they should have done and stick them in there. Give you guys a view of these parts real quick. This is how that tube was supposed to look. You can see the little O-ring gasket on the end there, and the fitting where the pipe is supposed to slide on. And this is what's left of the other one. Was it really that hard to go spend the $9 for another one of these tubes? Really? And then the new upgraded outlet thermostat housing cover. You can see that it has a machined surface and it's a cast piece, so it's got a nice thick flange compared to this stamped piece, which has a nice thin flange that can bend and create problems when sealing. This is $10 at O'Reilly's. Very, very cheap insurance to prevent the leak from continuing. If you guys find yourself with a leak, I'd suggest going and picking one of these up instead of globbing on the silicone like they did here, because that could save you time, money, and a hell of a lot of headache down the road. Plus, it just looks a hell of a lot better when you don't have to scrape all that crap off. Anyway, back to work. Well, I finally got the head off, and after cleaning up the mating surfaces on both, from what I can tell, this was simply down to a very poorly installed second cylinder head, excuse me, because both of these are stamped at 93. Considering the torque on the bolts, and everywhere that I found silicone, and all the other problems this thing had, I'm fairly sure that these heads have been off within the last, I don't know, year, maybe less. But this right here is why I tell people to lay off on the silicone. That is silicone stuck to a push rod. Somehow they got so much in there that it managed to adhere to what is supposed to be an oil-covered push rod inside the valve train. Separate, well, supposed to be separate from the cooling system. Lay off the damn silicone, guys. Seriously. Well, there you have it. It took me 2 days, but I've got it off. Both cylinder heads. I'm going to be cleaning them up. getting all the silicone and the old gaskets and stuff off, and as much of the grime as I can. There's the engine block. It is full of crap, but I am going to be cleaning it. Same with the cylinders. You're probably asking yourself, well, you got one side off because you had bad compression. Why'd you take the other side off? Well, that's because I didn't know exactly how bad that side was. There was silicone on 2 of the push rods on the passenger side of the engine. I didn't know how bad everything was on the driver's side. Now, one of the push rods for the number 1 cylinder is a little bent. I don't know how it'll show on camera. I mean, it's not horrible, but it is probably going to need to be redone eventually with straight push rods. And the lifters are probably all going to need to be redone eventually too, because they're all nasty and starting to show wear. So, yeah, that's some of the stuff that I get to look forward to. Yeah, you can leave the distributor in. Makes life a little bit easier. I'm going to be cleaning the engine and the cylinder heads before I put it all back together. But right now it's getting to be late at the end of day 2, so I'm probably going to hack it in and hopefully try to get this thing cleaned up and finished tomorrow. At least put back together enough that I'm not going to be standing out in the cold and the rain too much. A final note for some of you guys that might be watching this and don't know a whole lot about engines. Some of you may be wondering why head gaskets can be such a big problem. See, it is just a gasket in the sense that it keeps water going through the right channels, not keeping it out of the combustion chamber. But it is also part of the combustion chamber, because on the head gasket there's a steel ring around where the pistons go in, and that doesn't compress very much, and it actually becomes part of the combustion chamber. It's very thin, but when you're dealing with 120 psi, that little bit can make a big difference on compression. Believe it or not, high horsepower engines that are built specifically for like drag racing and stuff like that, they will measure the thickness of the head gasket in their calculations to figure out how much compression they have when they build the engines before they test them, because that little bit can make a lot of difference. So next time someone tells you you need a head gasket, don't ignore it. It could mean your engine.